31st Street near 9th Avenue in 1915, a 21-year-old structural ironworker named Art Van Hoorbeck was dangling in mid-air, 3 fingers crushed between 2 iron bars, as a derrick load carried him upward past the 2nd story, then the 3rd. No one had seen him yet. Picture it. 3 crushed fingers, a rising load with nowhere to stop, no way to signal for help without shaking him loose. The machine carrying him toward the 15th floor was the very same one that hauled every ton of steel to the top of a rising skyscraper. So how did anyone get tons of steel onto a rising skyscraper before the tower crane existed? In the 1880s, American cities ran out of horizontal room, and architects answered by building up. Steel skeletons made it structurally possible. Walls no longer had to carry the weight, so buildings could climb far higher than masonry alone allowed. But height created a problem steel mills alone couldn't solve. Something still had to lift every column and beam into place, floor after floor, with no practical way to erect a ground crane tall enough to reach the top. The machines that did it were called derricks, and around 1900 they were the principal technology for the job. Van Hoorbeck worked with what was called a raising gang, the crew that took steel beams and angle irons off delivery trucks at street level, hooked them to the derrick's cable, and rode the load up to the top of the building. His job was to ride each load as it rose, watch for anything that might tangle along the way, and help set the steel in place once it reached the top. The derrick itself stood on the building's own unfinished frame, a single guide mast with a boom held upright by steel cables anchored to the structure around it. As each floor went up, the crew dismantled the derrick, hoisted its own mast 1 level higher using its own cable, re-anchored the guys to fresh points on the new steel, and rebuilt it. So the machine climbed the building it was building, 1 or 2 floors at a time. It simply rose with the work, floor by floor, ahead of the riveters behind it. Coordinating a lift depended entirely on signals, since no one at the derrick's winch could see the load once it cleared the lower floors. At one Manhattan tower under construction in 1908, a magazine writer documented the code in use there. Bells rang through the steel skeleton, 1 to go ahead, 2 to slack off, 3 in quick succession to lower fast, 6 to stop everything at once. Codes like it varied from job to job, but the principle held everywhere. Once a multi-ton load left the ground swinging on a single cable, stopping it abruptly could be more dangerous than letting it continue. That was the problem the morning Van Hoorbeck's hand was caught. A truckload of angle irons had just arrived, and as he ran the cable through them, he spotted one bar that hadn't been looped in. Left unsecured, it could shake loose in the air and fall on someone below. Reaching in with a crowbar to fix it, he slipped, and the tightening cable clamped 2 of the bars shut over his hand, just as the load began to rise. He went up with it, dangling by 3 crushed fingers, past the 2nd story, the 3rd. At the 5th story, the guideline man spotted him and signalled the operator above, Tommy Todd. A stop signal would have jerked the cable and shaken him loose. Todd gave none. He let the load ride to the 15th story and set it down so gently that Van Hoorbeck's fingers held. Only then did the crew free his hand with crowbars as a crowd that had gathered below let out its breath. Not every crew handled that judgment equally well. Writing in 1908, one veteran rigger compared jobs for a magazine reporter. On the Williamsburg Bridge, only 4 men had died, 3 of them in a single derrick collapse that, in his words, nobody could have prevented. On the Blackwell's Island Bridge, a project he described as staffed largely with sailors unfamiliar with structural ironwork, 67 men had died over the course of construction. The difference in his account was not luck. It was whether the man beside you had spent years learning to read a swinging load, or had simply climbed rigging before and assumed the skills would carry over. The danger was not confined to the men on the steel. That same 1908 account, describing the 52-story Metropolitan Tower, recorded a 3-pound drift pin that slipped off a plank 50 stories up, struck a beam on its way down, and shot through the roof of a passing streetcar, burying itself in the floor beside a passenger's suitcase. A 40-pound bar fell from the same tower and bent double against a lower beam. A maul dropped from the 40th story and chipped the marble facade of a church across the street. On a job with thousands of moving parts operating hundreds of feet above a crowded city, the derrick's swinging load was only the most visible risk. You couldn't tell a competent raising gang from a reckless one, not until something went wrong, and by then it was usually too late to matter. A foreman at the Jersey powerhouse of the North River tunnels was said, in that same 1908 account, to have gone 28 years without a single accident under his supervision, a record other crews openly envied. What separated him, he told the reporter, was a flat refusal to put an inexperienced man near a moving load, no matter how badly the schedule needed the extra hands. A 1908 magazine writer touring these sites dubbed the men who rode the steel skyscrapers, describing a fatalism among them that outsiders found unsettling. A man could die on the ground as easily as in the air, more than one rigger told him, so there was no sense fearing the fall. Crowds still gathered at street level to watch anyway, necks craned upward, waiting for each load to clear the last few feet and disappear into the rising frame. Guy derricks climbed nearly every major American skyscraper for the next 4 decades, including the Empire State Building in 1930 and 1931. Only after the Second World War did true tower cranes, ground-anchored, radio-directed, capable of swinging a load without ever touching the structure they served, become common on American job sites. The climbing derrick did not fail. It was simply replaced by a machine that no longer needed a man riding the load to tell it where to stop. A modern tower crane lifts far more weight, reaches far higher, and often operates by radio from a cab high on the mast or remote controls at ground level. But the principle underneath it hasn't changed since Van Hoorbeck's morning on 9th Avenue. A mast, a boom, a cable, and complete trust between the man giving the signal and the man receiving it. What has mostly disappeared is the once routine practice of a rigger riding the load itself, floors below the man deciding whether to let it fall. These systems shape the skylines we now take for granted. If you'd like to see more of them documented, consider subscribing and tell us which forgotten craft or construction method we should uncover next.